Sand is all around us. It is the humblest of all minerals. Yet, after air and water, sand is the most consumed natural resource on Earth. Melted and transformed into different shapes, sand interconnects with our daily lives in ways we are not commonly aware of. Every construction site, paved road, and computer screen is made from sand, from the Hubble Space Telescope to the Great Pyramid of Giza. But it's more than just objects and buildings. Sand is also a source of silicon dioxide, a mineral found in the wine we drink, the paper we write on, and the dehydrated foods we eat. It's a mineral that is part of toothpaste, cosmetics, etc. At the same time, sand is a source of strategic minerals, such as silica, thorium, titanium, uranium. Without these basic materials, without sand, credit cards, bank machines, and even certain plastic and metal alloys would not exist. Sand is essential to innovation. It is the silent ingredient to human civilization. And as incredible as it sounds, we're running out of it. I'm your host Shirvan, and welcome to Caspian Report. Today's video is sponsored by Fishing Clash, a free-to-play fishing simulator available both on iOS and Android. Fishing Clash is a welcoming escape from the daily bustle of life. I like the fact that you can play solo or compete with friends. There are over 100 species of fish, but to catch bigger fish, you'll need to collect and upgrade rods, lures, and other gear. So, if you like the great outdoors but prefer the comforts of your home, Fishing Clash might be your thing. Click our link in the description and use our gift code FishWithCaspianReport to get a special reward that is only available for new players. With our gift code, you'll get a 3-star rod, 1 mythical lure, the Florida Pro license, and 30 weight power-ups for a total value of $20. To redeem your gift code, follow these 3 steps. The gift code will only be available for new users. So, if you have a minute to spare, download Fishing Clash from the link in the description. Sand has been used for construction since antiquity, but it was only with the advent of the modern industrialized world that industries began to harness the full potential of sand on a colossal scale. When mixed with cement and steel rods, sand becomes reinforced concrete, a material that revolutionized construction. Its flexibility, strength, and low cost made it an ideal material. Throughout the 20th century, reinforced concrete sculpted the contours of urban landscapes. Even today, at least 2/3 of all buildings worldwide are made of reinforced concrete, and the concrete itself is made for 2/3 of sand. The quantities used are difficult to comprehend. An average house uses 200 tons of sand, while a large building uses 3,000 tons. Every kilometer of highway uses 30,000 tons of sand, and when constructing something massive like a hydropower dam or a nuclear power plant, the sum goes into the tens of millions. Between 2011 and 2013, China consumed about 6.6 gigatons of concrete, a number that exceeds what the United States used in the entire 20th century. Meanwhile, new megaprojects are being constructed all across the globe. Cities are becoming bigger, and the world population will eclipse 10 billion by 2060. Urbanization is accelerating, and the need for buildings, electronics, and infrastructure will grow accordingly. The global demand for sand will increase steadily, but it has to come from somewhere. In the past, sand used in construction came from regional quarries and rivers, but those sources are now nearly depleted. So today, much of the sand used in construction comes from the sea. What happens is that a cargo ship called the dredger goes to the sea and pumps sand from the seafloor. Initially this was done to rivers, but upon realizing that dredging sand from rivers led to more floods, the ships were sent to the high seas. The North Sea is particularly rich in high-quality sand, but dredger fleets move across the globe in what is now a multi-billion-dollar industry. This has all sorts of environmental hazards to the marine ecosystem, but maritime sand by itself is salty, which doesn't go well with cement. So to use maritime sand, it needs to be washed with fresh water, which produces yet another long-term complication. Now, none of this would have been a problem were it not for the fact that sand is basically non-replenishable. The composition of sand is a process that takes centuries, if not millennia. What happens is that time and climate wear away mountains. Big rocks break up into smaller pieces and eventually fragment into stones. These stones are steadily crushed and polished into tiny pieces and eventually reach rivers and deltas. The trouble is when countries build dams to harness the hydropower of rivers. Globally, there are about 845,000 dams. These dams don't just hold water, they also trap sand. Half of the sand that could reach the sea someday somehow remains stuck. The sand, upon which civilization and innovation are built, is not being replenished by the forces of nature. Now, common knowledge tells us that our planet is covered in sand, the Arabian Peninsula and the Sahara Desert being prime examples. In fact, sand is the one thing we have in abundance, or so it might seem. However, desert sand is the wrong kind of sand. In his book The World in a Grain, Vince Beiser explains that desert grains are round. They've been polished by wind and time so thoroughly that they don't stick together to form durable concrete. For any construction project, whether it's an artificial island or a hospital, the sand grains need to have rough edges so that they stick together. Sand from rivers, banks, beds, floodplains, lakes, seashores, and the deep sea have rough edges, which makes them perfect for industrial use. Desert sand has the wrong properties and is thus considered worthless. This then explains why the United Arab Emirates imports sand from Australia, or why Saudi Arabia imports from Scotland, or why Egypt imports from India. Selling sand to an Arab used to be a saying. Now it is the pinnacle of irony. Today, cities are being built at a scale and pace never seen before in human history. Global supply chains are stretched thinly, and more nations are coming to recognize maritime sand as a finite resource like any other. The supply chain is not endless as previously believed. The scene in Singapore provides a glimpse into the future. The state treats sand as a strategic resource, stockpiling it in massive quantities and keeping it as a reserve, something that is comparable to the strategic stockpiling of oil and gas. For context, the last 3 decades have seen a construction boom in Singapore. The population has nearly doubled, while reclamation has increased its land mass by 20%. This urban and terrestrial expansion exhausted Singapore's local sand deposits, including its seafloor. Since then, the state turned to its neighbors for additional supplies to sustain its growth. However, sand is one of the most dynamic minerals. When you take it from underneath the sea, gravity will compensate for the deduction by moving sand grains from higher elevations, even over faraway distances. That means shorelines all across the world are shrinking in size. For maritime nations or island nations, that is a long-term complication, especially when factoring in rising sea levels. So, in the past 3 decades, as Singapore imported sand from its neighbors, some small islands started disappearing in the South China Sea. Indonesia, for instance, lost 25 islands while exporting sand to Singapore, which in turn resulted in border demarcation talks between Indonesian and Singaporean lawmakers. In 1997, the situation declined to such an extent that Malaysia stopped selling sand to Singapore. Indonesia and Cambodia followed suit in 2007, and Vietnam imposed a sand ban in 2009. Singapore still gets by using shell companies, but the ordeal shows that the increasing shortage of sand is transforming it into a strategic resource. Stockpiling sand could become a new practice in the near future. Now, if you want to learn more about the properties of sand, how it shapes modern civilization, have a look at The World in a Grain by Vince Beiser. It's a gripping book about an overlooked resource. Meanwhile, on a grand scale, as islands disappear in the South China Sea, international maritime boundaries change, or are required to change. Much like how Beijing's artificial islands are expanding Chinese maritime boundaries and associated privileges, the disappearance of islands would ergo reduce authority. The most extreme example is found in India, where the infamous Sand Mafia ranks among the most powerful criminal syndicates in the country. Indian law enforcement is using drones to combat the Sand Mafia and halt its illegal mining sites, but it's a battle without end in sight. The Sand Mafia is deeply tied to the nationwide construction industry with deep pockets in the political apparatus. What is happening in India, Singapore, and the United Arab Emirates is a manifestation of a slowly building crisis that demonstrates the coming of sand conflicts. There is strong scientific evidence to suggest that sand is becoming increasingly scarce in many parts of the world, and when a strategic resource becomes finite, it becomes a strategic catalyst for geopolitical strife, much like crude oil and natural gas. Conflict, after all, is oftentimes rooted in competition for natural resources. Unless something changes, the sand crisis will steadily promote maritime disputes, endanger communities, cause shortages while damaging the environment. Finite resources create near-infinite conflicts. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. Thanks again to Fishing Clash. Please download the game from the link in the description and don't forget to use the gift code for $20 of free stuff. Thank you for watching and Sahol.